kingdom divided against itself will be laid waste, and house will fall against house. And when the Civil War was happening back in our country about 150 years or so ago, this country of Italy was just being formed. And Rome was caught in the middle of this huge fight in which the governing power was taken away from the Pope and the Church and given to secular rulers. And the Pope at the time, Pius IX, was certainly fearful of a house being divided. And it was. The whole political landscape was being changed. And for the Church and its leaders, this whole episode seemed like a doomsday, really. Lamentations not unlike the ones we heard in our first reading today. Proclaim a fast, call an assembly, gather the elders, all who dwell on the land. Quite an emotional time. And I kind of mentioned this little history lesson for a few reasons. First, this church of Santa Lucia, as we see it today, was renovated during this time of struggle, about a century and a half ago. And as one of the Pope's initiatives to sort of maintain control of Rome, he commissioned these beautiful murals to be painted, especially this one above the high altar here. And they're intentionally patriotic. They're supposed to show that the church had not only spiritual leadership, but also temporal power as well. But what's interesting, if we look at our church in America during those times, we were really just a missionary country. We find ourselves coming back 150 years later, all of us missionary pilgrims, coming back to our roots, so to speak, to be revitalized by the splendors that are here in our crown city. And I know you've seen so many splendors this past week of touring around and seeing everything here. But as Christian disciples and missionaries for America, we're faced with a gospel message today which asks us to consider our loyalties and asks us to weigh those spiritual and earthly powers that compete to rule our lives oftentimes. We've got many loyalties, first, to ourselves, our family, work, our nation, and of course loyalty to God. But what do we do with those divisions that come from within ourselves? Those things that keep us from fully following Christ and His mission. Maybe it's habitual sins in our life. Maybe sometimes it's mix-up in our priorities. Sometimes we let fear and anxiety get in the way of our ability to face life's challenges. When we hold on to these fears, these prideful thoughts, thinking that they're going to save us, we really end up just dividing ourselves. And it scatters us from God as well. But the gospel is quite clear about these possessions. It says, when a strong man fully armed guards his palace, his possessions are safe, but when one stronger than he attacks and overcomes him, he takes away the armor on which he relied. What we can do today is leave this pride, this fear that we sometimes have and possess on the altar of the Eucharistic sacrifice that is going to take place here this morning. The folks in the gospel, they ask Jesus for another sign. But we know we've been given the greatest sign and assurance of His love, His presence, His mercy, right here on earth. And we can leave what we don't need on this altar and take from it the strength that Jesus gives us to work through those challenges that come with being faithful missionaries, faithful Christian disciples for America. And moreover, about the Eucharist, it is the sign of unity. To kind of go along with our history lesson from the start, Rome was conquered, but the church lived through it. So no matter where we find ourselves in this little Roman neighborhood church, we're back at St. Alexis, St. Paul Cathedral, St. Bernard's, St. Louis of Marillac, the Eucharist is continually celebrated as Christ's abiding presence, lifting our hearts and minds to things beyond even the splendor of this city, and onwards towards our heavenly home where there are no divisions.